What are the key considerations for the incoming government come May 29, 2023? Of course, you probably say that their work is cut out for them. We know what the challenges are on the fiscal side of the economy and the monetary. Perhaps I should break it down a little bit more. On the fiscal side, we have to do with what they call tax and spend. Basically, about how does government raise money and what does government spend on? What has been the experience of the last, perhaps since 1999, the return to civilian rule in Nigeria? How well have we fared in that respect? Nigeria still occupies one of the lowest positions in terms of tax to GDP, even in Africa. And of course, we're not efficient with the collection of government revenues in any other way in terms of government-owned enterprises. Many of them basically spend everything that they manage to make on behalf of Nigerians. There's been a lot of looseness, which has caused a few legislations in recent past in this regard. There's also the over-reliance on crude oil, which is still a big problem. And indeed, the assumption on crude oil is the only assumption that goes into our budget year in, year out. So we do have a problem with how to raise revenue and what to spend on. But it must also be noted that the Federal Inland Revenue Service did make a superlative performance in the last fiscal year, moving from about 6.4 trillion collections to about 10.1 trillion, which is about 60% growth, which is great. The monetary side of the economy seems to have actually maxed out, if you like. Indeed, delving into the fiscal space. However, inflation, which had been on the downward trend, is beginning to climb up again due to obvious reasons, which we are going to discuss in this show today. Of course, the other issues to consider: economic growth. Are we growing fast enough? A few pundits are now agreeing that a 3%, 2.5% growth is not enough for this economy, and we should be doing a lot better than this, in fact, targeting double-digit growth. What about the issue of our debt? Are we already maxed out? And what can be done in this regard? And what should we be doing in this regard? What have we got wrong in terms of our debt? These are key economic issues that the next government should actually be grappling with from day one. And to discuss this with us today, we have Dr. Abdurrauf Aliyu, an economist and a strategy expert. Welcome, Dr. Aliyu.
Thank you very much. Thank you, audience.
Right. Now, let me take you on a different trajectory. One of the key issues as we speak right now is the issue of cashless economy and the policy of the central bank to withdraw the old currency for new ones and to make Nigerians embrace cashless. What's your opinion on this?
Thank you very much. I think I've, on a personal note, I think I've written quite extensively on this matter on my column, one of the papers I write for. As a monetary policy, there is nothing wrong with it. It's actually the statutory function of the central bank, you know, and it's also the law that once every 5 years, CBN can decide in what format they want to change the currency, issue new currency notes and withdraw the old ones. And so, if you go by the law, we would say that the central bank had actually not been doing that for quite a while now. The cashless policy is also not a new policy. It's been there since Sanusi was CBN governor. Sanusi also met it as part of the FSS 2020 strategy. So it has been a broad strategy that was developed even when Charles Soludo was still the CBN governor, which was aligned to the NEEDS 2 document, which was supposed to help transform the Nigerian economy and align it into the global economy so that Nigeria can also begin to position itself properly. Having said that, my argument has always been that in as much as we need to change the currencies, probably because there's a need for us to checkmate the abuse of the currency itself, and also to get those funds into the banking system, and also maybe create a cap for which you cannot easily have access to cash, but you can do, and if you're going to have certain cashes, there should be cost associated to it. And when you raise those kind of requests from your bank, the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit should be alerted. Probably it should be for some illicit means. Probably you want to pay for a kidnap ransom, so that way we can track those monies. It's okay, and it will help us to even reduce the spate of insecurity, corruption, so that governments, as they were, will be able to track all forms of payments that goes in and out of government coffers. That is laudable. But the fact that you will want to legislate behavioral change, you cannot legislate me to change my behavior. You can only convince me.
Exactly.
Convince me, engage me, sensitize me on why you think the new behavior you want me to adopt is much more better. And and it will take time till when I get aware. And when I actually am able to get that, I'll also be able to sensitize others. But the fact that the central bank wants, for me, one of the key areas where I found out where I knew central bank was on the wrong footing was when the central bank actually did not communicate to Nigerians whether it was a currency change or a currency swap. Going through the statement, I had seen the central bank say, go to the bank and deposit your money.
Yes.
Not go to the bank and exchange your money. In 84, it was exchange of money. So you go to the bank and you exchange, yes. Yeah. In 84, you go and exchange your money. And even that, a lot of people were cut off, because I know a lot of people who actually went out.
So are we saying that Nigeria could never do such a project successfully? Can the central bank not be ready for people who want to exchange their money? To say, look, the whole idea is you're targeting, statutorily you're changing the currency as it should, every 8 to 10 years, or as the case may be. So are we saying we'll never get to a point where you say, bring your money and take the old one, because we're pulling this one out of circulation over a certain period of time? Why does it have to be a fiasco? Yeah,
that's what I was trying to explain. Before then you had placed a cap. You cannot get this amount of money over the counter, that would have been okay. But at least people will have exchanged, you will have said, okay, whatever amount of money you bring, you will be given, you're expected to open an account, and for how much you bring, if it is above 500,000, you will not be able to take more than that. Half of them will be in your bank account, which you can still access anytime you want, but we're only expecting to have this. And that way, we'll have certain amount of money in circulation. Then gradually, as people get aware and those monies get to the system and people begin to embrace gradually over the period of maybe 3, 4, 5 years, those monies, perhaps it will have reduced. And that has to bring us back to issues that had to do with effective project management, which I don't think the central bank actually didn't have. Managing, once you begin to manage, once you get, monetary policy is a policy, but it's also a project. Yeah. And you need project management skills for you to, execute it. Who are the stakeholders? What are the risks? How do you communicate it? What is the timeline? And if there are issues, what are the project scenarios? And how do you hedge against them should the case they happen? Then you must constantly communicate. I'm sorry, central bank was not communicating. It is that because the central bank also were taking directive. I didn't know what might be the next directive, so they also don't want to. Wow. Because for me, if you look at how the federal government managed COVID, every day there was somebody on the national TV who was giving you status report. So Nigerians knew exactly what was happening. There was no hotline. The central bank is just not talking to anybody. The corporate communications will issue statements in the morning, in the evening. They reboot those statements. So Nigerians get confused.
Yeah, it's quite confusing.
And so for me, this is actually not a currency redesign.
In the beginning, the idea was, okay, go and exchange your money. That was what I thought. Then, of course, it became, well, we are not going to release okay, now we want you to withdraw 100,000 every day. That's your limit for personal, 500,000 for corporate or thereabouts, and so we're limiting everything. And you can now go to your bank and withdraw. And then people go to the bank and realize that they couldn't withdraw that. And before you know it, people were actually queuing up for 2,000 naira for a whole day. Some are jumping fence. People are dying in the banking hall.
Bank workers' lives at risk.
Pushing and shoving. Bank workers' lives at risk. Then we started hearing,
insurance companies
is the banks that are hiding the money. But at some point I felt, no, it can't be only the banks that are hiding the money. It seems like, indeed, this money is not going out. Were we not prepared for this project? Yeah. Or is it about the politicization of the project like you said, central bank waiting for instruction and not knowing what the next instruction will be, or whoever is instructing them insisting on what he or she wants to happen.
And so that brings us again back to the merit of it. In as much as we have certain problems we want to solve, and there are national security issues, I understand that at a point in time, the president of this country said that national security at each point in time supersedes the rights of any citizen. And so what it means that the sufferings of all the citizens is not a concern, it's not a national security threat to those who are in power, rather it is a national security. And I keep on asking this question, and therefore I ask this question: who defines what Nigeria's national security is? Is it the president who decides it, or is it the constitution and the citizens who define what the national security of this country is? What is Nigeria's national interest? Is it the president who defines it when it aligns with his interest? Or is it citizens who define what citizens, and so that citizens can protect those, citizens can die for that national interest? You know, when you, again, I ask people, if we're in a society where we value time, and we value productivity, it's not just in Abuja. You go to Kaduna and you see somebody who will go to the queue, who will go to the office in the morning report and not return it because he needs to go and queue in the bank from morning till evening. This is going to tell on our GDP.
Yeah,
and our poverty and our inequality reports over the next 3 quarters.
Inequality, yes, already, poverty, I think, is affecting inflation.
Unemployment.
Inflation way back up, because people are having to pay
much
30% to get their money. You want 10,000 naira, you have to lose 2,000 naira or lose 3,000 naira.
Let me even put it straight to you. You know, if you are coming to Kaduna.
Just a second. So we're talking of inflation, unemployment,
poverty, inequality, and we are also going to have low productivity of in agric. You know, I listened to the central bank governor now, and I laughed. The central bank governor was on TV and was telling Nigerians how he had report that price of commodities like soybeans and maize had crashed. And he was happy saying it. It didn't crash because you pulled out money. It crashed because the farmers need to pay back the loans they took from the banks. And this is dry season. They also need to buy farm inputs now before they get expensive. They also need to do 1 or 2 repairs because this is dry season. And most of these farmers come from rural areas. You imagine a farmer who will come from somewhere like Kuyelo in Biningwari local government of Kaduna, who takes like 1 hour 30 minutes to get into Biningwari town. He picks these goods and brings them to Kaduna on a Tuesday market called Cow Market. You know, and he's able to sell them because people won't pay him cash. So he decides the only way he can do, if he takes them back, he's also on that cost. He decides to drop the costs and crash the price. And the fact that let me even get something to take me back home and I'll bear the loss. And somebody sits down at central bank and sees, price of goods. Do you also know the price of eggs have crashed? Eggs are now selling for 16 naira. Do you think they want to? No. Eggs don't have a very low shelf lifespan. So if they need to sell them, buy feeds, get those chickens to eat until I can dispose the chicken and then close down the business. So you don't go loss. And that's why price, because I practically saw somebody in Jos bought eggs in a truck to terminal and was actually selling a crate for as low as 1,600. He just wanted to dispose them. And somebody will say inflation has dropped. No. Inflation is not strictly a monetary. It's not strictly a monetary issue. I don't know where people be. I don't understand why people in central bank think that inflation is 100% driven by. I don't understand.
Unfortunately, I think that reminds me of Mr. Friedman when he said inflation is every time and always a monetary phenomenon. But of course, people have disproven him that it's not necessarily a monetary issue, money supply, and I think we need to have a better feel of some of these issues, especially as they affect the most vulnerable, this large informal economy that's suffering. But let's move away from that and back to the issue. You know, let's talk about this very briefly before we go on a break. So maybe like 2 minutes, you know. So back to the issue. Are these the same issues you mentioned, inequality, GDP, unemployment? Are those the same issues that the next government should be grappling with?
Yes, those are the things.
Is there anything to add?
No, I think for now those are the most critical things. Inflation, foreign exchange is actually not a problem for majority of Nigerians. So inflation is one, and then you also need that's inflation. We're looking at from the cost of living. Then you also need to look at when I say cost of living from inflation, you could look at crisis of energy, which has also been has been shooting up, and you don't even have them, So it's actually interwoven with several factors. They also need to look at unemployment. A lot of micro and small businesses, people who own private businesses, are already closing shop because they can't do transactions. That's something, again, we need to tackle, and that will lead to inequality because more people will be pushed into poverty. And already inequality is trying to look at inequality between the urban poor, the urban people, and those the rural poor, who are mostly affected by this policy as on ground now.
Hold on to your thoughts. We'll go on a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll continue with the discussion on the agenda for the next government. Welcome back. And we've been discussing the agenda for the next government with Dr. Abdurrauf Ali. And before we left, you were just closing your thoughts on some of the critical issues. But I wanted to add that just this morning I was reading in one of the newspapers that the price of kerosene was up to 1,300 naira per liter in many places in Nigeria. The average nationwide is about 1,100 per liter. Of course, we know that the price of diesel is also up to 900. We're still holding down the price of petrol in many parts of Nigeria at about 195, even though in many parts maybe up to 300. If we fully deregulate, perhaps we'll be looking at 900 naira to 1,200 per liter. Is there any escape for the common man? That's one. I want you to think about that. And secondly, this issue of inflation. Are there ways to manage this from the government angle? For example, we see where we were talking about a government legislation recently, or a government policy, which ended up increasing the rate of inflation, which impacts the poorest. In fact, perhaps causing deflation when farmers have to sell what they have, on the cheap, even at a loss, just to survive. So which way forward, and what does the next government do the moment they come in? What do you think they should be doing as a matter of urgency?
I don't know who the next person will be. The next 3 days probably will decide. But whoever that person is, the person has a lot of work. I don't think the person has the time to sleep. Whoever the person will want to make up his cabinet should have been ready by now. I don't think he has time. He has time to waste because Nigeria is actually in serious crisis. And we don't want time, we don't want what repeat itself for us to spend the next 6 months running helter-skelter and waiting for somebody's body language to redirect the country and put it in shape. That said, I think one of the biggest issues we need to look at for now, for the poor, inflation still remains, the cost of living still remains. I want to talk about cost of living. I'm not talking about the costs, because those in rural areas will not necessarily, when we say they're not affected by inflation, they are. They are the ones who use, you might say they don't use kerosene, but they use firewood.
Exactly.
And so if they use firewood, again, the health implications of firewood, what they are. And for a country that had been signing all sorts of agreements with net zero and carbon emission also, it also means that you're going left, while in reality, your country is moving towards the right. And so, for me, and I want to put it here, it is not everything in economics that has to do with that you need to apply market principles. And so if you understand the principles of strategic studies, and when you do when you try to look at it from a grand strategic perspective, so economic policies should help to guarantee your economic security, not necessarily to make some people rich. So how a businessman thinks about an economy is not how an economist and a policymaker should think about what economic policies should look like. So if a businessman looks at international trade from how he makes profits, it is a company, for the country, it is how will it help you to assert your influence in international politics and in return get more benefits. That said, if you go to India, for instance, why is it that when you go to India, there are no big shopping malls? You think there are no investors, or do you have more population than them? It's a national policy. The bulk of the voters in India own the mom and pop shops. And so that is the most protected industry in India.
Wow.
And there's no Walmarts. Because the moment you bring a single Walmart will displace like the whole community in India,
Honestly.
and that is unemployment. So in as much as you want to bring foreign direct investment, Indians like foreign direct investment, they also need to protect the social cohesion of their citizens. To me. So you need to balance between what you call national interest and what you call making economic policies that you make. It's not all economic policies that you think they will be rational to you today. And rationality, as I tell people, is actually, it's relative. And that's some of the things we've not done. So in a country like us, where we talk about deregulate the oil and gas industry, deregulate diesels, and you know that power sector is actually not stable, and you also have signed an AFTA agreement and you want your products to be cheap, and one of the key inputs for the production sells at a very high price, how do you now compete? So can we make it a deliberate policy? Yes, with our government. For now, you'll be allocating, you have major industries who you know and sectors. And at the central, what you call the CBN, I mean the NNPC will provide these people with this amount of quality, and you're sending it directly into their production plants. Not as if you're sending it so that they want to sell in black market. Why? Because you also want to bring, that's your contribution. So for me, rather than giving some tax incentives or for some tax incentives that doesn't make economic sense to most of us and great competition for some people, why don't you have those direct interventions? And you know who these industries are. And when you send this to these industries, we want to see them names published. We want to see it reflecting in the price of what they're selling drops. And citizens can benefit. In between that, in doing that, citizens get more jobs. Citizens pay more taxes. You now have much money to now be able to put monies into your power plants. It's just common sense. And so it is not, for me, I don't think we need people who come with some very grand economic theorists or economic professors who will come into policy making. It's just for you to be able to connect the dots. Secondly, if you go back, if you have read the poverty report, which to me was something I expected CBN to have read before this policy came on board. The policies, then the last MBS report said we had 63% of Nigerians who are poor. 70% of them and absolute poverty and rural areas. Now, when you take a FINA report also, that CBN also, that bills and against also funds, and you look at financial inclusion, you also find out that a lot of communities in Northwest and Northeast are dislocated. Most of them, even in rural areas, you don't have access. It is a report you see, you have access to. Then you make up a policy. And they assume that these infrastructures will suddenly, within 3 months, just take care of themselves. So you have farmers who already, these families, whatever gains this administration think they have had. And hope you also know the reason why most of the people who were culprits of kidnapping were farmers. They made a lot of money. If you think that what it made, they also used it to pay for ransom. Most people don't know. But when you go to a lot of farmers who were kidnapping Katana, all you need to know, do you know that he made 600 bags of maize this year? And 2 weeks later, somebody kidnaps you. You sell that 600 bags of maize to pay, and then you're back to square zero. And that's why you still go to those areas and see those farmers didn't make any progress. They made money, but they also spent it because their lives were not secured. So they were already in crisis. And now the only food they had, and don't forget these funds, most of these funds were from inputs. Now price of fertilizer have shot up. It's not as if it has dropped. So these are the kind of basic crises we need to look at. What do you need? Do we need to address those? How do we address rural dwellers? For me, I think whoever comes into government, in as much as most of us who live in city see issues that needs to be addressed, I think the key for Nigeria to take off, we need to go back and ensure that our foundation, which are basically in rural areas that feeds us, actually are properly taken care of. Not just to give them funds. It's not the amount of trillions that you give them, but there are a lot of backward integration and infrastructures that needs to be put in place, and so that way we'll be able to get more people. There are a lot of private sector initiatives also for private sectors who have also made a lot of input, and which is also helping to grow the agri sector. One of the things I was expecting this government to have done was that by now we'll have had a very functional commodity exchange, so that farmers can actually, the farmers that are selling their products now will have a guaranteed. What government will have been doing now is government will have been mopping up at the market price, rather than them, so you will have a government that's mopping up these issues, and now have factories that will off-takers who will take them off and now produce these things. So these are some of the challenges. And as I said, people don't earn money, they can't feed, and they can't purchase. Factories produce less, if they produce less, people lose their job. And people lose their job, there are no taxes. And when there are no taxes, government can't do anything. So the next thing government will do is to increase the debt.
Yes, exactly.
It's
so
common
you
economics.
Debt now. So we're going to close on debt, but I wanted to quickly chip in that in a place like China, even the private sector has got involved in poverty eradication.
Yes.
By, in fact, first of all, you enumerate who each family is documented. Their problems are documented. Is there sickness in the family, illiteracy? So that it's targeted, and that's one of the things I'm researching, what the Chinese call the targeted poverty eradication program. And the private sector is involved in resettling some of those people who live in very difficult areas, and all of that. So, and I like that. I also want to amplify what you said about India protecting this mom and pop shop, because every time we raise these issues, those who manage to make it into policy positions in Nigeria, coming from foreign ideas and so on, will tell you, he's interventionist. Why should government intervene? But every country should be able to have its own strategy regarding that one. So lastly, this is our last question because we're actually out of time, maybe in 1 minute. What do you think about Nigeria's debt situation, and what should the next government be thinking about regarding that?
It's one of the biggest challenges Guinea are going to have. And so, as you said in the beginning, I think they need to step back, and I think the quick win they have now is just to block up the leakages. We already have ways and means that are in trillions of naira. Moody has already downgraded us. So what it means, the cost of raising foreign debt bonds are going to be very expensive for Nigeria, and it's not attractive. And even given the poly crisis that expected and the global inflation expected this year, they are going to be slowed down. And that's one of the reasons why China is also not, the funds for the railways actually are not coming the way they came a few years ago. Anymore. And so there's a limit. I don't think CBN can also get to raise more. But all in all, I think the first quick win is to first of all block those, and then if possible package those ways and means in form of bonds, bad debts, and actually float them in the market and see for a long period of time, and let's see where Nigerians can buy them. They can have a bit of a quick flow when they begin to get very expensive, very expertise in financial engineering that actually help us restructure those debts to move forward. Even though the DMO keeps deceiving Nigerians to say we're okay, and I keep on telling them no, we are not. So I think whoever the next president is, I just want them to understand that there are 200 million Nigerians, irrespective of how each of us will vote. The reasons why we are voting whatever way we are voting is that we believe that either of them will be able to set Nigeria on the path better than we are today and make lives better.
Thank you very
much. If you win or if you lose, whatever ideas you have, can you just share with other people so that at least Nigeria can grow and be prosperous? It's not a win for one person, it's a win for the country.
Thank you, Dr. Aliyu. Thank you very much for coming. And we've been speaking with Dr. Aliyu on the agenda for the next president on the economic spectrum. Thank you for staying with us. See you next week.